Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another edition of the Middle Georgia Spotlight. I'm your host, Jack Ellis. Glad to have you with us in the Spotlight this week. Again, we've been here. He's been here before. It's Virgil Watkins, the Commissioner of Virgil Watkins of the Macon Bibb County Government, and he's the chair of the Finance and Service Committee for the government here. But why he's here in the Spotlight today? He's had the courage. And people say it's time for politicians to have uncommon courage. He's had the courage to introduce in the Bibb County government an ordinance to decriminalize marijuana in Macon, Georgia. That takes some courage. Welcome to our program.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Well, Virgil, of course, you millennium, I guess we can call it. It's not just millennium that's had experience with marijuana. Marijuana has been around for a long time, but now it seems to be more prevalent throughout the country. People legalize it and so forth. Why now in Macon, Georgia? So you want to? You're not legal. You're not saying legalize it. You want to decriminalize it. Why is it important to decriminalize marijuana in Macon?
Yes, sir. So when we say decriminalize in this sense, we're speaking on decreasing the penalty associated with it. Just as you spoke on, throughout the country, there's a way with folks that are considering full-out legalization. In some places, it's completely legal for medicinal use and recreational. At this point in Georgia, those laws haven't changed yet. But locally, we have the right to decrease the penalties associated with it. Currently on our books, for less than an ounce of marijuana, you could spend up to a year in jail and have a $1,000 fine.
For any amount?
For any amount less than an ounce. So anything more than an ounce is considered a felony, and yeah, that's definite jail time, possession. But if you had an ounce or a bag in your car, very common, but typically what happens, the judge, if no one was hurt or injured, no DUI, you end up serving a couple months probation or a year. But they use the up to a year jail time as a kind of a negotiating tactic, because anything that your lawyer brings you back that doesn't include jail time, you're going to be tempted to take it. So $650 fine, 18 months probation is probably the more common. But on our books, the officer and our judges have the right to give you up to a year in jail. And it's common for folks to spend a day or two in jail on the initial arrest, because it's an arrestable offense. So the police take you in, and you could spend the weekend in jail before being convicted of this crime also. So what we're trying to do in Macon is turn it into a ticketable offense, a civil ordinance that would be handled just like a traffic ticket or a parking ticket. You would receive a ticket on the scene, the officer would confiscate the goods, but you would be free to continue on your day. It's still an illegal substance, and you will have to go to court or pay the fine to address that issue later, but again, it would only be a civil fine, whereas now you're dealing with it in state court, and it could be a misdemeanor or graded worsely.
So basically, you're not promoting, advocating the use of marijuana. You're saying if young people or older people, whoever is using marijuana, they should not be penalized. They should not have this on their record. They should not be put in jail.
Correct.
They should be treated like any traffic violation or anything of that nature.
Correct.
So that's your goal.
Correct. I think the legalization is a conversation that we should have as a community, and I want to have it, but the way the state laws and federal laws overlay our local, there's only so much we can do. And this is taking a big step. We're going from, like I said, a $1,000 fine or jail time, all the way down to $75 is the proposal. And you got to realize that there is a difference between the criminal justice issue and mental health and substance abuse. And I think there is a serious conversation we need to have in our community about young people who are self-medicating or using it recreationally. Because when I think about smoking, whether it be marijuana or a cigarette, I usually think of the stressed out individual who's waiting or has some type of anxiety that he's trying to treat. And that's what the medical and our mental health people tell us about this drug. And we know that our young men have large amounts of stress, trauma that they're dealing with, death, poverty. So and black men still don't go to the hospital or seek mental health. So it makes sense that those type of things may be true, but right now we have a society or a culture that they mess up and we're willing to throw them in jail versus actually getting them the help they need.
Now, I've heard you quote some stats. So did you, when you looked at the stats and how many people are being arrested in Bibb County, what did you see? Young people being arrested, was there a disparity in race and
Yes,
things of that nature?
very much so. Because right now the officer is showing a lot of discretion. One of the conversations that I've had with law enforcement and the criminal justice side is that, they're, by and large, they're not arresting people for joints now. Like most officers on the street are showing that discretion. But you do see in this, over the past years, about 190 arrests where it was just marijuana of less than an ounce. And 140 of those individuals were black males under the age of 35. So the theory being that, and I think it's true that our outcomes when we hit the criminal justice system are worse off than every other group. Like I said, with the decision and power that they have, like I say, for the difference between a gram and an ounce is quite severe, and the difference between a $100 fine and $1,000 and 2 days in jail are quite severe. And when you go to court, they have that complete, anything in between there is what they can give you. And it just seems as though our young black males get the worst end of that discretion. So we're trying to close that gap a lot by having a law that's at $75. Treat it like you treat folks when they get pulled over on Zebulon Road is what I'm asking you to do.
Now, the prevalence, because marijuana is so prevalent now, because it's legal, people are using their vaping, they're doing other things. How is this affecting the employability of young people? For instance, the city, county of Bibb, if someone goes to apply for a job and they take this drug screening test, if they have marijuana, they're not going to get hired.
That is correct today, and that is going to continue to be true. I mean, working for the county, and I would assume this to be true for any other major employer in our community. Just like with our fire department, our public works, a lot of folks we want to hire them, but you cannot pass a drug test. We can't let you on our forklift, drive our trucks, handle our equipment if you're not sober at work.
But see, here's the thing. My problem with that is, that's like having 3 beers at night or having 3 shots at night. You do that at night. You don't do it at work. But if we probably test it, we'll probably see some alcohol in those people's blood the next morning. But they're not drinking on duty. They're not. So if a person smokes at night, it's going to be in their bloodstream for two months, maybe. I don't know how long it stays there. So do you see, I know you're not dealing with that with this ordinance, you're just dealing strictly with, but I'm just talking about from a broader sense, looking down the road, how do we, because if so many young people are smoking and they want to get a job and they can't get a job because they're smoking, at what point do we get some leniency here and say, we're not advocating you smoke, but don't smoke on the job. But if you smoked last night and you came to work this morning perfectly sober and do your job, what's wrong with that?
So I agree. I understand. I agree with your point. But I think at a certain point, being an adult, if you want to be successful in this world, there's certain sacrifices you have to make. And if you want a job, particularly to be a fireman or a police officer or working any job in our county, you need to take 2-3 weeks off your marijuana. Just like you wouldn't come in with alcohol on your breath. Marijuana is a drug that sits in your system a little longer. You're not going to come to the job interview with alcohol on your breath. You can't come with marijuana. It's
some people will take exception with the calling it a drug, number one.
Yeah. And I think you're going to see private employers and folks relaxing their drug testing as it goes on. But there's still going to be some jobs in this world that's taken very serious. And for a lot of our counties, so. Just if you crash our trash truck, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to the occupational medicine, and they're going to test your blood for any type of drug in it. And if you have it, you're immediately fired. Whether it be alcohol or anything else, you're immediately fired. It's a liability in terms of insurance. And from the human resource standpoint, it's from the front end. If we knew you had that issue when we first hired you, we put you on the truck, and then you crash it, and then we test you, and you still had it in your system, like the county has, we're completely liable as well because we knew you had this issue, and we allowed you to do it, didn't do anything about it. And also to the point, like if you start a substance abuse issue while you're working with us, and you go to the boss and say, hey, I need some counseling or help. We don't fire you.
In other words, you can admit, yeah,
Yeah.
I've been using marijuana. I want to tell you I've been using it. Now I want to get off of it.
And actually, the county's obligated to provide you, like your health insurance is obligated to help you with that.
Yeah.
Marijuana, alcohol, the same way, any other drug. Honesty and being upfront, but I think for our young people, we got to tell them, because I don't see it changing within the next decade, that you're going to need, for a lot of jobs in America, you're going to need to be able to have a clean drug test.
But you know, I guess young people look at this and they say, look, of course, if you're trying to join the military, it can't be in your blood. We know that. But yet a football player at the University of Georgia can get tested one time with, and maybe you get suspended for 2 or 3 days or whatever, or 2 or 3 games. NFL the same way. Then they say, well, the second time or the third time, you're out. So where's the compassion for the first offense? Say, okay, this is one time, you're okay, but don't do it again.
Yeah, I think as the governments, we reduce it from not being a criminal activity, that public and private sectors will start understanding that as well. But the conversation I keep hearing is that it is mind altering, and there's some things that you shouldn't do inebriated because you could harm yourself or others.
And I agree with that. And maybe I'm in a different lane where you are, and we want to get back in this lane about the legalization. So what's the not legalization, but decriminalization here in Macon? What's the status of that ordinance right now?
So, like I say, it's in committee right now. So your government is deliberating the issue. It was tabled at our previous meeting. We're optimistic on May 7th that it'll be taken off the table and hopefully be able to vote and move it forward. It's interesting. It's cutting kind of close down racial lines, and it kind of makes sense to me. This is an issue that
when you say cutting down racial lines, those who are for and against, you mean?
Yes. So.
But statistics say that white children smoke marijuana at the same rate as anyone else.
Right, but their outcomes when it comes to the criminal justice system are less severe. So the question of why are you changing the law, that's not affecting us in that way. But for us in our communities, we're seeing that, hey, no, that is ruining lives. Whereas it's a slap on the wrist, or if you have a child, and that's what we kind of want, that we want folks to show compassion towards our children who are making first-time mistakes at a party or recreation or get pulled over. That right there is harsher for our kids than it is for theirs, because for whatever reason, the stereotypes, there's an immediate assumption that our young black men are drug dealers, right? Or are doing something that's super criminal, when again, the statistics show that we use it at no greater rate than they do, and possibly less. But again, their outcomes when it comes to criminal justice are less severe, so they have a problem. And so the stereotype of you're gonna make it easier for drug dealers exists in the conversations that we've been having. It's an unfair stereotype, but I mean, those are the realities of the conversations. I think my hopes are that as we talk about it more, and also that conversation on that it's a gateway, that by changing this law that it will make it easier or more accessible for kids to experiment. I have an opinion that in general, people who smoke, they've already kind of made that decision. If you're a young person and you decided that it's nasty, that me changing the law greater or less is not going to affect that. Like, is my general opinion on that.
Well, and we have about 1 minute left. Tell me this: how many votes? You have 4 votes now. I understand.
Yes.
So you need 5.
Yes.
Do you think that 5th vote is there when it comes off the table on the 7th?
I'm very optimistic. I think as we talk about it more, we get understandings. Even the $75, like Commissioner Allen was speaking, that he thought the $75 was too low. My key concern is that people no longer go to jail for it. So if changing 75 to 500 solves the problem, I think that works well. Because my concern is taking away jail.
Well, good. Well, we've been talking with Virgil Watkins, who is the county commissioner for the Macon-Bibb County system here, government, and he is also the chair of the finance committee, but most importantly, he introduced legislation along with 3 other sponsors to decriminalize marijuana or cannabis, whatever you want to call it, in the city of Macon and Bibb County. And we'll see how that goes. Virgil, thanks so much for joining us, and we appreciate you being here.
Appreciate it, sir.
All right. Please, we'll be right back. Thank you. 3, 2, 1, go. Hello and welcome back to the Middle Georgia Spotlight, and we have joining us now in the Middle Georgia Spotlight Dr. Chester Fontenot. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. It sounds French to me, but he's been around Mercer University now for some 20 years as a professor of Africana Studies as well as a Baptist professor of English here at Mercer University. Welcome to our program, Doc.
Well, thank you very much for the welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, good to see you. When we talk about the Africana, I happen to know a little history about that. We're talking, is that the outgrowth of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, the Africana?
It certainly is.
It's an outgrowth of that.
It certainly is.
So explain to us a little bit what the whole purpose of the Africana studies.
Well, it's a way of conceiving the African diaspora. Wherever black people were taken during the slave trade, wherever the slave ships landed, that reestablishing the connection between those groups of black people, primarily in African American life, Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, and also in Europe. Yeah.
So the work that Dr. Du Bois started continues through
Very much so.
programs like yours and other universities.
Yeah, Dr. Du Bois, of course, the father of Pan-Africanism.
Right.
Right. And so this Africana studies really develops out of that, the sense in which Pan meaning across, Africa. And then very recently, probably about 7, 8 years ago, the African Union included Africans in the diaspora as the 6th region of Africa. Right? So now there's 5 regions of Africa, East, West,
yes,
North, Central, and South. But then the 6th region of Africa is wherever Africans are, African people of African descent are in the diaspora.
Right.
Right? So we are now considered by the African Union as Africans in the diaspora.
As a matter of fact, just recently, there was an ambassador for for the diaspora was in Atlanta, I remember.
Yes.
But I know you hosted the former ambassador
Exactly.
here once for a symposium.
Right.
Not only that, we went to Ghana a few years back, 18 years ago, I guess,
Right.
and we went to the home where W.E. Du Bois and where he did most of his work and his research. Is that information available to everyone now online, or how do you access that information? Because there's so much information there.
We were kind of blown away.
Yeah.
Remember, by all that information that we saw there. To my knowledge, that information there had not been digitized yet. Of course, in Africa, the whole process of trying to get stuff digitized and posted on websites, stuff like that, moves a lot slower for a number of reasons. Chief being power. Power and technology and the availability of certain resources, et cetera. But there are lots of people who are aware of the tremendous resources there in the home that Dr. Du Bois lived in, that President Kwame Nkrumah, in fact, granted to him when he left and went into exile.
And he's buried there, too,
he's buried. Yes. He's buried there on those grounds. It's a national landmark in Ghana. Yes, yeah.
Now, I travel to Africa a lot, but I'm nowhere near the expert that you are. You've been studying and traveling through Africa many, many years. But as you look at Africa today, we see there seems to be, we had the Arab Spring, was primarily in the north with Egypt, Algeria, and all of that, not Tunisia, and recently Algeria. But recently, it's moving south. We see Sudan. What if you take a look, but yet Africa is so important to the world because of resources. The Chinese are there doing great things. But if you take this 30,000-foot view view of Africa, what do you see down the road? What do you see now in terms of democracy, economic opportunities, and so forth?
Well, one thing that we find in Africa and most African nations is a resistance to Western influences because they've seen what they've wrought, starting with colonialism. So every time a Western power, comes in and said, we want to help, we have a bunch of money, we have a military, we have this, et cetera, African people and governments say, whoa, wait a minute, take a step back. We know where this leads. It leads to a loss of our land, it leads to disenfranchisement of our people, it leads to all kind of bad things, right? And so there's still this great resistance to Western nations, coming into Africa and doing certain things other than things like Doctors Without Borders, for example, where they're coming in and helping with like Ebola, and other things such as that. China has an advantage in Africa because there's a long-standing relationship between China and Africa. Dr. Du Bois wrote an entire book on China and Africa. For example, China has been associated with Africa for really a long time, and even during the liberation movements in Africa during the 1960s, the decade of liberation, China was the ones that was supporting that the liberation movements in Africa, China and Cuba with Fidel Castro. Right. Okay. Also, I just had this conversation a few months ago with the African Union ambassador, in fact, in Washington, D.C., that China comes in and they say, and the African nations are saying, we need this, we need some money, we need various resources, infrastructure, et cetera. The Chinese government just says, how much do you need?
I'm telling you, that's exactly.
And they write the check, okay? Now, when you look at the World Bank and you look at other, financial institutions, Deutsche Bank, et cetera, they want to attach all kinds of conditions on the money that they give. China is not. China is just saying, oh, you need roads, you need airports, you need schools or whatever, how much, And
so what you're saying is actually there's a partnership because China needs the resources.
Exactly.
Africa needs the infrastructure.
Exactly.
So
it's a partnership.
It's a quid pro quo. It's a
Right.
partnership.
Right.
It's not taking everything out. There's value additions
Right.
on the thing. So that is so that should help Africa. This belt and
Certainly.
road initiative that China has
Right.
running through Africa. So if you look down the road, you would say with this type of money, infusion of money, 10 years from now, would you see Africa as a more prosperous?
Certainly. Right. And it's already happening in certain areas. You go to East Africa.
Oh,
a lot,
Ethiopia,
and
Somalia,
East Africa tends to be much more developed than many West African
And it is.
nations, as you know. You've been to both, areas. And so, but what's happening in West Africa, in particular, is that now the Chinese are coming in a stronger force. They've already been in East Africa, for really quite some time. Now they're making inroads into South Africa. But in West Africa, you have now the Chinese coming in and making inroads there and helping with infrastructure, because one of the main problems in Africa, as you know, is power.
Yeah.
You'll be sitting up doing something and all that, and also the power goes out. And then when the power goes out, it might be out for weeks or months.
And they're really making some improvements.
Yes, they're making great improvements in there. China's helping with power grids, for example, with roads, and without good roads, your economy
When you look
cannot
at,
function very effectively.
When you look at the governance of Africa now, you see some leaders, a country that I represent, Uganda, he's been there 33 years, 70. The guy that just chased out of Sudan was there 30-some years.
Right.
So are the young people now saying that like we had that Arab Spring, now it's happening, they call it the African summer, and it gets pretty hot in the summer. Exactly. So they're saying, we want these people. How much of that is influenced, you think, by the West, or is that organically homegrown?
The young people, I think it's organic. Many young people who are not even connected, or have any experience with Western nations are saying this, right? Of course, that's just partly being young, that you want change. You want younger people in there. You want people that identify with you and the kinds of things you're doing. But the other thing is that they know how much corruption there's been. Somebody been there 30 years, 33 years, and he's got a bank account of $5 billion, sitting up in Sweden, something, and the average person is living on less than $1 U.S. money a day, right? People
talk about income inequality.
Right. People are not great, with very little middle class, if any, at all. The problem, of course, with development is that if you don't have middle class people, then the middle class usually generates jobs for the lower class people, right? I generate jobs for kind of lower class people. I need somebody to cut my grass. Okay,
Yeah.
I need somebody. I had my
Clean
home.
your house.
I cleaned my house. I had my home remodeled. You know, a
Right.
couple of years ago. You know, I paid somebody to do that. You know, et cetera, painting and replacing the floor, things like that. Well, in Africa, you don't have middle class people. Very middle. You have the very very rich,
Yeah.
and you have the very very poor people, and so it becomes really problematic. Now, well, one thing that hinders the replacement of a lot of these people who have been there for so long, right, 30 years or whatever, is the culture, right, where you have a veneration of the elders, right, where elders are respected. Now, that's a great thing, you know, to respect the elders. But, for example, in Nigeria, where the President Obasanjo, the previous president, he came here to Atlanta, all right, and people put out the word, I'm here. I want to see Nigerians. So Nigerians went up there, right? A lot of my friends went up there. They came back horrified from the meeting, right? Because they were challenging, you know, his policies, et cetera. And some young people were doing that. Obasanjo looked at one of the young people and said, "Who is your father? You know, would he approve of you talking to me like this? You know, go back and ask your father." You know, and so, you know, and the young man sat down and shut up.
Because those are the values.
Those are the
taught.
values, right, and the cultural values, you know, et cetera. But democracy can be very difficult sometimes. There are certain areas.
There's a different type of democracy.
There's a different type of democracy. Democracy is endemic in Africa, all right? That democracy was there before Western culture, right, et cetera. Where you have councils of elders, councils of women, you know, et cetera. You have this whole democratic structure all the way up to the king, right, et cetera. You have these checks and balances in traditional African culture, society. Colonialism screwed that up. It really messed that up, right? But still, at the base layer in most African nations and African villages, you still have kind of democratic structures. But now, when you have leadership at the presidential level that is there and doesn't want to recede power, you know, at all, then you have a problem because you have people who don't know how to get that leader out. You have a person who's been there. You have an election, you know, that's taking place, et cetera. People are being elected at the barrel of a gun, you know, just about. So you have problems with that.
Doc, explain to me, we have 2 minutes left. Explain to me, how do you square? Africa is in need of so much, but there's so many intelligent African doctors, engineers, all around the world making contributions. Now with the Chinese come in with value addition, they're going to be processing things that they used to send out. So what will it take to get these engineers and doctors and other people to say, hey, you need to go back and help develop the country, or to stay there? Is that thinking too? No,
it's not. In fact, I worked on a program called Stopping the Brain Drain, addressing the brain drain in Africa. That's what we call it, the brain drain, okay? And that has been occurring because of a lack of resources and infrastructure in Africa. That if, in fact, you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a professor, you know, and actually be able to earn a good living and be conversant with current, you know, trends in your field and technology, et cetera, you have to leave, right? And so once people go to Europe, or they go to Canada, or come to the U.S., they don't go back.
And that's very unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, are we to blame them that here you can have a better life, you know, than going back, and now you have to face.
But making a contribution, you can go back and take the knowledge. That's what a lot of people are saying now. Well, I got to have you back on. Yeah. I really have. We're fresh out of time right now, but I want to have you back on. Maybe I know school is ending here, maybe before the next school year starts. Give you a whole 30-minute, because I think there's so many people that need to hear what you have to say about Africa, because Africa is the future, the continent of the future.
Exactly.
About 1.2 billion people. Most of them are under the age of 35.
Right.
So it's a huge market, and it's growing. The resources are there, and you have a lot of knowledge of it. And I think the more we share knowledge about Africa, the more people understand Africa, the more these stereotypes will fall, and maybe more people will go there and even seek investments and even live there.
You're right.
Well, Doc, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
And continue the good work that you're doing here at Mercer University with the students and what you're doing in the community at large. Sorry, at the Pan-African Festival, I know you've been, and that's a good way to educate people about Africa. We could spend 30 minutes talking about that, but unfortunately we don't have any time.
Right.
Thank you. We've been talking with Dr. Chester Fontenot, who is a professor of Africana Studies at Mercer University, also a professor of Baptist English, Baptist professor of English at Mercer University. And we thank you all so much for joining us this week here on the Middle Georgia Spotlight. Until next week, I'm your host, Jack Ellis. Goodbye.